Sherwood. Read, watch, listen.
Chapter 18. Crying as if his heart would break, the marionette mourned for hours over the length of his nose. No matter how he tried, it would not go through the door. The fairy showed no pity toward him, as she was trying to teach him a good lesson, so that he would stop telling lies, the worst habit any boy may acquire. But when she saw him, pale with fright and his eyes half out of his head with terror, she began to feel sorry for him, and clapped her hands together. 1,000 woodpeckers flew in through the window and settled themselves on Pinocchio's nose. They pecked and pecked so hard at that enormous nose that in a few moments it was the same size as before. "How good you are, my fairy," said Pinocchio, drying his eyes, "and how much I love you." "I love you, too," answered the fairy. "And if you wish to stay with me, you may be my little brother, and I'll be your good little sister." "I should like to stay, but what about my poor father?" "I have thought of everything. Your father has been sent for, and before night he will be here." "Really?" cried Pinocchio joyfully. "Then, my good fairy, if you are willing, I should like to go to meet him. I cannot wait to kiss that dear old man who has suffered so much for my sake." "Surely, go ahead, but be careful not to lose your way. Take the wood path and you'll surely meet him." Pinocchio set out, and as soon as he found himself in the wood, he ran like a hare. When he reached the giant oak tree, he stopped, for he thought he heard a rustle in the brush. He was right. There stood the fox and the cat, the two traveling companions with whom he had eaten at the Inn of the Red Lobster.
"Here comes our dear Pinocchio!"
cried the fox, hugging and kissing him.
"How did you happen here?"
"How did you happen here?" repeated the cat. "It is a long story," said the Marionette. "Let me tell it to you. The other night, when you left me alone at the inn, I met the assassins on the road."
"The assassins? Oh, my poor friend! And what did they want?"
"They wanted my gold pieces."
"Rascals!"
said the fox. "The worst sort of rascals," added the cat. "But I began to run," continued the Marionette, "and they after me, until they overtook me and hanged me to the limb of that oak." Pinocchio pointed to the giant oak nearby.
"Could anything be worse?" said the fox. "What an awful world to live in! Where shall we find a safe place for gentlemen like ourselves?"
As the fox talked thus, Pinocchio noticed that the cat carried his right paw in a sling. "What happened to your paw?" he asked. The cat tried to answer, but he became so terribly twisted in his speech that the fox had to help him out.
"My friend is too modest to answer. I'll answer for him. About an hour ago, we met an old wolf on the road. He was half starved and begged for help. Having nothing to give him, what do you think my friend did out of the kindness of his heart? With his teeth, he bit off the paw of his front foot and threw it at that poor beast, so that he might have something to eat."
As he spoke, the fox wiped off a tear. Pinocchio, almost in tears himself, whispered in the cat's ear, "If all the cats were like you, how lucky the mice would be."
"And what are you doing here?"
the fox asked the Marionette. "I am waiting for my father, who will be here at any moment now."
"And your gold pieces?"
"I still have them in my pocket, except one which I spent at the Inn of the Red Lobster."
"To think that those 4 gold pieces might become 2,000 tomorrow! Why don't you listen to me? Why don't you sow them in the field of wonders?"
"Today it is impossible. I'll go with you some other time."
"Another day will be too late."
said the fox. "Why?"
"Because that field has been bought by a very rich man, and today is the last day that it will be open to the public."
"How far is this field of wonders?"
"Only 2 miles away. Will you come with us? We'll be there in half an hour. You can sow the money, and after a few minutes you will gather your 2,000 coins and return home rich. Are you coming?"
Pinocchio hesitated a moment before answering, for he remembered the good fairy, old Geppetto, and the advice of the talking cricket. Then he ended by doing what all boys do when they have no heart and little brain. He shrugged his shoulders and said to the fox and the cat, "Let us go. I am with you." And they went. They walked and walked for a half a day at least, and at last they came to the town called the City of Simple Simons. As soon as they entered the town, Pinocchio noticed that all the streets were filled with hairless dogs yawning from hunger, with sheared sheep trembling with cold, with combless chickens begging for a grain of wheat, with large butterflies unable to use their wings because they had sold all their lovely colors, with tailless peacocks ashamed to show themselves, and with bedraggled pheasants scuttling away hurriedly, grieving for their bright feathers of gold and silver, lost to them forever. Through this crowd of paupers and beggars, a beautiful coach passed now and again. Within it sat either a fox, a hawk, or a vulture. "Where is the Field of Wonders?" asked Pinocchio, growing tired of waiting.
"Be patient. It is only a few more steps away."
They passed through the city, and, just outside the walls, they stepped into a lonely field, which looked more or less like any other field.
"Here we are,"
said the fox to the Marionette.
"Dig a hole here and put the gold pieces into it."
The Marionette obeyed. He dug the hole, put the 4 gold pieces into it, and covered them up very carefully.
"Now," said the fox, "go to that nearby brook, bring back a pail full of water, and sprinkle it over the spot."
Pinocchio followed the directions closely, but, as he had no pail, he pulled off his shoe, filled it with water, and sprinkled the earth which covered the gold. Then he asked, "Anything else?"
"Nothing else," answered the fox. "Now we can go. Return here within 20 minutes and you will find the vine grown and the branches filled with gold pieces."
Pinocchio, beside himself with joy, thanked the fox and the cat many times and promised them each a beautiful gift.
"We don't want any of your gifts," answered the 2 rogues. "It is enough for us that we have helped you to become rich with little or no trouble. For this we are as happy as kings."
They said goodbye to Pinocchio and, wishing him good luck, went on their way. Chapter 19. If the Marionette had been told to wait a day instead of 20 minutes, the time could not have seemed longer to him. He walked impatiently to and fro, and finally turned his nose toward the Field of Wonders. And as he walked with hurried steps, his heart beat with an excited tick-tack, tick-tack, just as if it were a wall clock, and his busy brain kept thinking, "What if, instead of 1,000, I should find 2,000? Or if, instead of 2,000, I should find 5,000? Or 100,000? I'll build myself a beautiful palace, with 1,000 stables filled with 1,000 wooden horses to play with, a cellar overflowing with lemonade and ice cream soda, and a library of candies and fruits, cakes and cookies." Thus amusing himself with fancies, he came to the field. There he stopped to see if, by any chance, a vine filled with gold coins was in sight, but he saw nothing. He took a few steps forward, and still nothing. He stepped into the field. He went up to the place where he had dug the hole and buried the gold pieces. Again nothing. Pinocchio became very thoughtful, and forgetting his good manners altogether, he pulled a hand out of his pocket and gave his head a thorough scratching. As he did so, he heard a hearty burst of laughter close to his head. He turned sharply, and there, just above him on the branch of a tree, sat a large parrot, busily preening his feathers. "What are you laughing at?" Pinocchio asked peevishly. "I am laughing because, in preening my feathers, I tickled myself under the wings." The Marionette did not answer. He walked to the brook, filled his shoe with water, and once more sprinkled the ground which covered the gold pieces. Another burst of laughter, even more impertinent than the first, was heard in the quiet field. "Well," cried the Marionette, angrily this time, "may I know, Mr. Parrot, what amuses you so?" "I am laughing at those simpletons who believe everything they hear, and who allow themselves to be caught so easily in the traps set for them." "Do you, perhaps, mean me?" "I certainly do mean you, poor Pinocchio. You who are such a little silly as to believe that gold can be sown in a field just like beans or squash. I too believed that once, and today I am very sorry for it. Today, but too late, I have reached the conclusion that, in order to come by money honestly, one must work and know how to earn it with hand or brain." "I don't know what you are talking about," said the Marionette, who was beginning to tremble with fear. "Too bad. I'll explain myself better," said the Parrot. "While you were away in the city, the Fox and the Cat returned here in a great hurry. They took the 4 gold pieces which you have buried and ran away as fast as the wind. If you can catch them, you're a brave one." Pinocchio's mouth opened wide. He would not believe the Parrot's words and began to dig away furiously at the earth. He dug and he dug till the hole was as big as himself, but no money was there. Every penny was gone. In desperation, he ran to the city and went straight to the courthouse to report the robbery to the magistrate. The judge was a monkey, a large gorilla, venerable with age. A flowing white beard covered his chest, and he wore gold-rimmed spectacles from which the glasses had dropped out. The reason for wearing these, he said, was that his eyes had been weakened by the work of many years. Pinocchio, standing before him, told his pitiful tale word by word. He gave the names and the descriptions of the robbers and begged for justice. The judge listened to him with great patience. A kind look shone in his eyes. He became very much interested in the story. He felt moved. He almost wept. When the Marionette had no more to say, the judge put out his hand and rang a bell. At the sound, 2 large mastiffs appeared, dressed in carabineers' uniforms. Then the magistrate, pointing to Pinocchio, said in a very solemn voice, "This poor simpleton has been robbed of 4 gold pieces. Take him, therefore, and throw him into prison." The Marionette, on hearing this sentence passed upon him, was thoroughly stunned. He tried to protest, but the 2 officers clapped their paws on his mouth and hustled him away to jail. There he had to remain for 4 long, weary months. And if it had not been for a very lucky chance, he probably would have had to stay there longer. For, my dear children, you must know that it happened just then that the young emperor who ruled over the city of Simple Simons had gained a great victory over his enemy, and in celebration thereof he had ordered illuminations, fireworks, shows of all kinds, and, best of all, the opening of all prison doors. "If the others go, I go too," said Pinocchio to the jailer. "Not you," answered the jailer. "You are one of those—" "I beg your pardon," interrupted Pinocchio. "I, too, am a thief." "In that case, you also are free." said the jailer. Taking off his cap, he bowed low and opened the door of the prison, and Pinocchio ran out and away, with never a look backward. Chapter 20. Fancy the happiness of Pinocchio on finding himself free! Without saying yes or no, he fled from the city and set out on the road that was to take him back to the house of the lovely fairy. It had rained for many days, and the road was so muddy that, at times, Pinocchio sank down almost to his knees. But he kept on bravely. Tormented by the wish to see his father and his fairy sister with azure hair, he raced like a greyhound. As he ran, he was splashed with mud even up to his cap. "How unhappy I have been," he said to himself, "and yet I deserve everything, for I am certainly very stubborn and stupid. I will always have my own way. I won't listen to those who love me and who have more brains than I. But from now on, I'll be different, and I'll try to become a most obedient boy. I have found out, beyond any doubt whatever, that disobedient boys are certainly far from happy, and that in the long run they always lose out. I wonder if Father is waiting for me. Will I find him at the fairy's house? It is so long, poor man, since I have seen him, and I do so want his love and his kisses. And will the fairy ever forgive me for all I have done? She who has been so good to me, and to whom I owe my life. Can there be a worse or more heartless boy than I am anywhere?" As he spoke, he stopped suddenly, frozen with terror. What was the matter? An immense serpent lay stretched across the road, a serpent with a bright green skin, fiery eyes which glowed and burned, and a pointed tail that smoked like a chimney. How frightened was poor Pinocchio! He ran back wildly for half a mile, and at last settled himself atop a heap of stones to wait for the serpent to go on his way and leave the road clear for him. He waited an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, but the serpent was always there, and even from afar one could see the flash of his red eyes and the column of smoke which rose from his long pointed tail. Pinocchio, trying to feel very brave, walked straight up to him and said in a sweet, soothing voice, "I beg your pardon, Mr. Serpent. Would you be so kind as to step aside to let me pass?" He might as well have talked to a wall. The serpent never moved. Once more, in the same sweet voice, he spoke. "You must know, Mr. Serpent, that I am going home where my father is waiting for me. It is so long since I have seen him. Would you mind very much if I passed?" He waited for some sign of an answer to his questions, but the answer did not come. On the contrary, the green serpent, who had seemed, until then, wide awake and full of life, became suddenly very quiet and still. His eyes closed, and his tail stopped smoking. "Is he dead, I wonder?" said Pinocchio, rubbing his hands together happily. Without a moment's hesitation, he started to step over him, but he had just raised one leg when the serpent shot up like a spring, and the Marionette fell head over heels backward. He fell so awkwardly that his head stuck in the mud, and there he stood with his legs straight up in the air. At the sight of the Marionette kicking and squirming like a young whirlwind, the serpent laughed so heartily and so long that at last he burst an artery and died on the spot. Pinocchio freed himself from his awkward position and once more began to run in order to reach the fairy's house before dark. As he went, the pangs of hunger grew so strong that, unable to withstand them, he jumped into a field to pick a few grapes that tempted him. Woe to him! No sooner had he reached the grapevine than crack went his legs. The poor Marionette was caught in a trap set there by a farmer for some weasels which came every night to steal his chickens. Chapter 21. Pinocchio, as you may well imagine, began to scream and weep and beg, but all was of no use, for no houses were to be seen, and not a soul passed by on the road. Night came on. A little because of the sharp pain in his legs, a little because of fright at finding himself alone in the darkness of the field, the Marionette was about to faint, when he saw a tiny glowworm flickering by. He called to her and said, "Dear little glowworm, will you set me free?" "Poor little fellow," replied the glowworm, stopping to look at him with pity. "How came you to be caught in this trap?" "I stepped into this lonely field to take a few grapes and—" "Are the grapes yours?" "No." "Who has taught you to take things that do not belong to you?" "I was hungry." "Hunger, my boy, is no reason for taking something which belongs to another." "It's true! It's true!" cried Pinocchio in tears. "I won't do it again." Just then the conversation was interrupted by approaching footsteps. It was the owner of the field, who was coming on tiptoes to see if, by chance, he had caught the weasels which had been eating his chickens. Great was his surprise when, on holding up his lantern, he saw that, instead of a weasel, he had caught a boy. "Ah, you little thief!" said the farmer in an angry voice. "So you are the one who steals my chickens." "No, not I! No, no!" cried Pinocchio, sobbing bitterly. "I came here only to take a very few grapes." "He who steals grapes may very easily steal chickens also. Take my word for it. I'll give you a lesson that you'll remember for a long while." He opened the trap, grabbed the Marionette by the collar, and carried him to the house as if he were a puppy. When he reached the yard in front of the house, he flung him to the ground, put a foot on his neck, and said to him roughly, "It is late now, and it's time for bed. Tomorrow we'll settle matters. In the meantime, since my watchdog died today, you may take his place and guard my henhouse." No sooner said than done. He slipped a dog collar around Pinocchio's neck and tightened it so that it would not come off. A long iron chain was tied to the collar. The other end of the chain was nailed to the wall. "If tonight it should happen to rain," said the farmer, "you can sleep in that little doghouse nearby, where you will find plenty of straw for a soft bed. It has been Melampo's bed for 3 years, and it will be good enough for you. And if by any chance any thieves should come, be sure to bark." After this last warning, the farmer went into the house and closed the door and barred it. Poor Pinocchio huddled close to the doghouse more dead than alive from cold, hunger, and fright. Now and again he pulled and tugged at the collar which nearly choked him, and cried out in a weak voice, "I deserve it. Yes, I deserve it. I have been nothing but a truant and a vagabond. I have never obeyed anyone, and I have always done as I pleased. If I were only like so many others and had studied and worked and stayed with my poor old father, I should not find myself here now, in this field and in the darkness, taking the place of a farmer's watchdog. Oh, if I could start all over again! But what is done can't be undone, and I must be patient." After this little sermon to himself, which came from the very depths of his heart, Pinocchio went into the doghouse and fell asleep. Chapter 22. Even though a boy may be very unhappy, he very seldom loses sleep over his worries. The Marionette, being no exception to this rule, slept on peacefully for a few hours till well along toward midnight, when he was awakened by strange whisperings and stealthy sounds coming from the yard. He stuck his nose out of the doghouse and saw 4 slender, hairy animals. They were weasels, small animals very fond of both eggs and chickens. One of them left her companions, and going to the door of the doghouse, said in a sweet voice, "Good evening, Melampo." My name is not Melampo, answered Pinocchio. Who are you then? I am Pinocchio. What are you doing here? I'm the watchdog. But where is Melampo? Where is the old dog who used to live in this house? He died this morning. Died? Poor beast. He was so good. Still, judging by your face, I think you too are a good-natured dog. I beg your pardon. I am not a dog. What are you then? I am a marionette. Are you taking the place of the watchdog? I'm sorry to say that I am. I'm being punished. Well, I shall make the same terms with you that we had with the dead Melampo. I am sure you will be glad to hear them. And what are the terms? This is our plan. We'll come once in a while, as in the past, to pay a visit to this hen-house, and we'll take away 8 chickens. Of these, 7 are for us and 1 for you, provided, of course, that you will make believe you are sleeping and will not bark for the farmer. Did Melampo really do that? Asked Pinocchio. Indeed he did, and because of that we were the best of friends. Sleep away peacefully, and remember that before we go we shall leave you a nice fat chicken all ready for your breakfast in the morning. Is that understood? Even too well, answered Pinocchio, and shaking his head in a threatening manner, he seemed to say, We'll talk this over in a few minutes, my friends. As soon as the 4 weasels had talked things over, they went straight to the chicken coop which stood close to the doghouse. Digging busily with teeth and claws, they opened the little door and slipped in. But they were no sooner in than they heard the door close with a sharp bang. The one who had done the trick was Pinocchio, who, not satisfied with that, dragged a heavy stone in front of it. That done, he started to bark, and he barked as if he were a real watchdog. Bow, wow, 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 wow. The farmer heard the loud barks and jumped out of bed. Taking his gun, he leaped to the window and shouted, What's the matter? The thieves are here, answered Pinocchio. Where are they? In the chicken coop. I'll come down in a second. And in fact he was down in the yard in a twinkling, and running toward the chicken coop. He opened the door, pulled out the weasels one by one, and after tying them in a bag, said to them in a happy voice, You're in my hands at last. I could punish you now, but I'll wait. In the morning you may come with me to the inn, and there you'll make a fine dinner for some hungry mortal. It is really too great an honor for you, one you do not deserve. But as you see, I'm really a very kind and generous man, and I'm going to do this for you. Then he went up to Pinocchio and began to pet and caress him. How did you ever find them out so quickly? And to think that Melampo, my faithful Melampo, never saw them in all these years. The Marionette could have told, then and there, all he knew about the shameful contract between the dog and the weasels. But thinking of the dead dog, he said to himself, Melampo is dead. What is the use of accusing him? The dead are gone and they cannot defend themselves. The best thing to do is to leave them in peace. Were you awake or asleep when they came? Continued the farmer. I was asleep, answered Pinocchio, but they awakened me with their whisperings. One of them even came to the door of the doghouse and said to me, If you promise not to bark, we will make you a present of one of the chickens for your breakfast. Did you hear that? They had the audacity to make such a proposition as that to me. For you must know that, though I am a very wicked marionette full of faults, still I have never been, nor shall ever be, bribed. Fine boy, cried the farmer, slapping him on the shoulder in a friendly way. You ought to be proud of yourself, and to show you what I think of you, you are free from this instant. And he slipped the dog collar from his neck.
Thanks for watching Sherwood. Scan the QR code to download our free app. Subscribe for unlimited access to books, audiobooks, podcasts, movies, and shows. See you next time.